joining. The last in our four-part series, kind of uncovering why recoveries fail. This webinar here is one of our $500 tech demonstrations. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and a link for playback will be made available to all attendees following the conclusion of the webinar, roughly 24 to 48 hours as soon as that's made available to us from the WebEx console. Also, all attendees were placed into listen-only mode. I've chatted in with a couple of folks, so good morning to everyone out there that's joined us here, but please use the chat or the Q&A functionality within the WebEx console. We have some time reserved for Q&A, and we'll get to any questions at the end of the presentation here. And lastly, 5 of our lucky attendees will be entered into a drawing to win one of our $100 Amazon gift card prizes. So we have a total of $500 in prizes. 5 lucky attendees will be selected at random following the presentation, so keep an eye out for in your email for notification for our winners. Now, without any further ado, my name is Adam Margette. I'm a technical specialist here with Unitrends, and I will be your host for today's presentation. So glad that everyone could join us. Now, before we kind of jump in and get started here, I did want to open up a quick poll question. As I had mentioned, this is the 4th in our series, and our marketing group is interested to learn, how did folks hear about this session? So if you just take a moment, if you see that poll popping up within your WebEx console, we'd really appreciate your participation. We're always looking to collect additional information to continue to improve our events and leverage other resources to drive folks. So please do feel free to indicate if you're feeling comfortable how you heard about this particular session, and we'll give folks about 20-30 seconds here to get in and complete the poll. All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Looks like the majority of folks heard of us through email, but for some of the folks that had been on a previous webinar in the series, thank you so much for coming back. It's great to have you with us here. A couple of folks have been perusing Unitrends.com, always some great information there, as well as updates on future seminars and future series. And for folks that hadn't heard of the session from their account manager, I have to have a little chat with those folks. It seems like they've let me down here a little bit. But let's kind of dive right in. Obviously, the nature here in focusing on why recoveries fail, it's important to understand why we are creating backups and looking to perform recovery in the first place. There are a myriad of issues that can interrupt the day-to-day operations on site for an organization. And when we think about what disaster looks like from an IT perspective, I think in a lot of cases we're drawn to those larger headline-grabbing incidents, hardware error, natural disaster, the threat of ransomware and malware. But those headline-grabbing incidents, and while they often represent the most severe situations or incidents that we are responding to, they're correlated in some cases with the most downtime and the heaviest costs of recovery. They're fewer and further between. Really, the bottom of the list here, some of these more severe issues are a smaller percentage of the events that can cause downtime here, but more commonly we see things like human errors, software issues, and that's a lot of what we're going to be uncovering today. Not just disaster, but what configuration issues, what kind of hidden risks there might be with recoveries specifically that would impede that recovery or further extend that downtime. And it's important, I think, to be ready to respond to a myriad of threats because the demands that we're seeing from our business units across the industry are getting tighter. In a lot of cases, we've observed sort of this less is more landscape for IT professionals in which we're being asked to perform more tasks, manage more risk, ultimately more data, all while being provided less budget, less resources, whether that be from a manpower or a staffing perspective, as well as a shrinking tolerance for downtime. The research that you're looking at here is a combination of Cloud Endure and Gartner. Cloud Endure is an AWS partner, and they conduct an annual survey. In the 3 years For the past 3 years in which they've conducted this survey, organizations striving to meet a service availability goal of 5 nines, approximately 40-something seconds of downtime per month has increased by 33%. We're overall, again, seeing this demand on IT, and it's correlated. There's a significant cost to an organization's outage. The average figure from Gartner here in this chart on the right is that they will tell you it's about $9,000 per minute is the average cost of an unplanned system outage. And you might feel that that number sounds high for your organization, potentially low for larger organizations that may be on the line with us today. But I think that we can all agree that in taking into account this number, it goes beyond the organization's inability to transact or drive revenue for the business. But also taken into account in this figure are the impacts of employee productivity if they're unable to accomplish their day-to-day functions without the systems or the applications that they rely on. And also, depending on the disaster, what does that cost of recovery look like? Do we need to implement new hardware, expert consulting and implementation services, or was it something more innocuous like a user error where we just had accidental deletion? Those costs will vary depending on what we are responding to, but I think it's important to give kind of a framework and an idea of ultimately the risk that we're all facing here. With that being the case, it's still been a challenge. Data protection for a lot of organization is not always free of errors or doesn't always work as expected. The results here are from the Unitrends cloud survey, where we've collected the data and information from over 400 different responding organizations and group, not all of them customers of ours, but some folks that are not on our platform, and it's still a significant minority that have experienced downtime in the last year. And when we see that they're experiencing downtime, unfortunately, it's also correlated with data loss. Over the last 4 years in which we've been conducting this survey, really no significant improvements in being able to shore up our strategies and prevent that loss of data. Those near zero RTOs and RPOs, that continuous data protection, still I think has left some folks with gaps or may not always produce the desired results or as intended. It's a tricky, I think, kind of scale that we are trying to balance. And some of the challenges that we've observed is that ultimately, kind of what we had talked about in that less is more landscape, insufficient IT resources, where we're seeing a greater demand, kind of broad strokes, in which organizations and leadership are driving IT groups to perform or improve application availability or applications to improve end user experience. We're not necessarily seeing the same investment and priority in maintaining equipment and hardware in the data center with advancements in the digital age. These budgetary limitations can impact both manpower and the resources at your disposal. And when we look at where organizations are going, the overall shift and trends of workloads moving towards public cloud infrastructure or software as a service, potential pitfalls where a lack of in-house expertise has led to coverage gaps or unprotected data. Ultimately, what we are seeing is that there's still a significant percentage, 11% of data in the on-premise data center is going without protection, and that's suffering even more at remote or branch offices. With our workforces evolving and becoming increasingly mobile, do you have protection and adequate data protection for those endpoints to safeguard the intellectual property that's being created potentially outside of the office, where folks are not coming in regularly or at times at all to connect to your network? We want to ensure that we've got a strategy in place for those employees as well. So now that we've kind of established the landscape here, and it's not always the prettiest picture, Unitrends is here to help, and that's always been our goal. For the last 30 years, we have been laser focused on data backup and disaster recovery. With 3 decades of experience, it's now over 30,000 customers across the globe that trust Unitrends for their data protection and disaster recovery needs. With a combination of our hardware and software solutions, we're protecting well over 2 exabytes of data locally, and with the Unitrends Cloud, a proprietary manufacturer's managed solution, we're managing over 100 petabytes of customer data in the Unitrends Cloud. It's actually the fastest growing or the fastest adopted segment of our business this year in 2019, a really popular service offering. through that Unitrends cloud. Really backing and supporting everything that we do as our customer support organization. They are entirely US-based and co-load with our research and development teams for a unified experience. If we push out a new version update and an engineer is seeing a bug or a break fix for the first time, he's not quite sure, he was kind of half asleep when he was going through the training module. I'm not saying that that happens, but if it were to happen, they've got the benefit of being able to hop right across the hall to the individuals that are writing and developing the code for the product. That unified experience has led to a very, very satisfied customer. We maintain a rolling 98% customer satisfaction rating, and I think it's important that all of the support that we perform is 24/7 by 365. Your 8x5 support is a thing of the past. Disasters don't call ahead, and if that strikes at 1 in the morning, you've got a Unitrends representative on the other end of the line that's fully prepared and ready to assist you. We've won a couple of awards. Do want to call out again the support organization. Took home a couple of Stevies in 2019. Year-over-year winners of gold and silver awards for that customer support, customer service organization. They do, again, an absolutely top-notch job. I really like to tip my hat to those folks. But ultimately, what we're striving to provide customers is an answer to kind of this here, what your organization or what your infrastructure may look like today. You've got a mix of products here that's kind of represented by the different colors. Hey, we've got our physical server workloads. We started to virtualize maybe a decade or so when that technology really started to get hot. We've got a couple of legacy apps that are still kicking around on physical hardware. So we've got multiple layers here: server, storage, the virtualization layer, the operating systems, on-premise backup software now. And could that be multiple products? We had invested in a solution to protect our physical x86 tenants. When we started to virtualize, that same platform didn't have a great answer to protecting virtual machines, so we've integrated in a second point product, another GUI, another siloed component that we have to manage. That evolution has now taken us off-premise and into the cloud. Are we leveraging cloud infrastructure, maybe for storage purposes or for production workloads? If so, are we running backup and DR software there? And ultimately, how do we perform that recovery testing so that we've got the proof and the confidence in those restore points to come? What this approach has led to for a lot of customers that we've worked with is sort of this Frankenstein approach where they've introduced more risk and more complexity into the environment, and they're burdened with what we would consider one of those low-value IT tasks. They're not driving end-user productivity or customer experience. You're spending time, in the back room or in the server closet, tinkering, tuning, and managing systems. The potential risks of interoperability. We've applied a patch update here. All of a sudden, does that break the connections that we had with our backup solution there? If we're struggling to get a restore to work and we're leveraging multiple vendors for the backup and restore and for the secondary storage, have you ever run into that finger pointing where we can't get VM to restore, call up our software vendor, they say, oh no, that's an issue with the hardware device, you've got to call those guys. You give them a call and they say the same thing, only that it's the software product. With Unitrends, we've strived to reduce all of this, the multiple GUIs, multiple maintenance calls, those potential risks of interoperability by offering an all-in-one solution. Our vision is to enable our customers with a full business continuity stack under a single platform with a single vendor and a single user interface to manage all of your tasks, your local backup and restore, file level restore, replication, restoring virtual guests, recovery testing, data deduplication and compression, not leveraging in those multiple vendors and having that precarious stack to balance, where you've got a unified solution that's been purpose-built or designed to handle multiple workloads and all of these multiple processes. So what that line card looks like here with Unitrends is it's going to start with deployment of local backup and recovery operations. There's flexibility for our customers in how you can deploy the solution, either a capacity-based rack mount hardware appliance, that box has the backup software, as well as compute, memory, storage, and flash resources for all of your local backup and recovery processes. Your reporting, your replication, your data reduction is all powered by that box. You're not standing up additional licensing or additional proxies to perform any of those common tasks that come along with backup and recovery, striving to offer, again, that all-in-one approach. Now, if you're looking to leverage existing server and storage resources, you can deploy our software on top of your favorite hypervisor, whether that's VMware, Hyper-V, Citrix Zen, or Nutanix AHV. Whether you've deployed physical or virtual, you've got access to a broad range of compatibility for support for over 250 versions of operating systems, applications, hypervisors, and cloud. So when we say you can protect your physical machines at the file level, at the block level, you can do so. If you need to snapshot VMs, you can do so. If you need to perform application-specific backups to collect information and backup databases, process transaction logs, truncate those logs, you can do all of that with the local appliance here with Unitrends, physical, virtual applications, and storage. So locally, you've got the means to perform granular recovery, recover entire guests, leverage instant recovery, create replicas, kind of a proactive measure, a standby copy of mission-critical physical or virtual clients, but it's still important to guard against those site-wide outages by getting that data off-site. Again, there are a myriad of options from which you can replicate your data to. You can create an air-gapped copy on removable media such as disk or tape, replicate to another storage device, or if you're looking to really prepare for off-site recovery, you can replicate to another Unitrends appliance, whether it's physical or virtual, or even the public cloud. You can deploy our software as a cloud instance through the AWS or the Azure marketplaces to serve as both a replication target as well as backup or protect those workloads that you may have running in public cloud infrastructure. You can also leverage the Unitrends cloud, kind of taking us down into this lower left quadrant here. And when the Unitrends cloud is coming into the equation, it's been designed for only two use cases: long-term retention of your data and our white glove disaster recovery as a service. So recovery at a secondary site or in the public cloud is orchestrated in the responsibility of the user. Replication and recovery in the Unitrends cloud is a hands-free white glove service that's implemented by our Cloud Cores team through our disaster recovery as a service. We take steps to seed that data in advance, stand up networking configurations, define boot order dependencies, execute regular application level scripts against the backups that we're receiving to fully test and map through recovery. We report back to our users on a regular basis. We're so confident in our process from the onboarding to the ongoing monitoring and testing that those SLAs that we provide, as aggressive as a 1-hour RTO SLA, are money backed. We're extremely confident in our solution. So again, we're enabling our customers throughout the entire stack here, from local backup and recovery to the ability to recover offsite if you've got a secondary location or are starting to leverage public cloud infrastructure. If your organization isn't quite there today, but it's a route that you're looking to go or something you're looking to explore, you can consider leveraging the Unitrends cloud for the long-term retention of your data. There are no egress or ingress fees. It's a granular a la carte license in which you're just sizing out for capacity and retention. No gotchas, no hidden fees there, as well as being able to enroll large volumes or mission-critical machines in that no-touch disaster recovery as a service. So that was the bulk of what I was going to talk about specifically to the Unitrends solution, and we're about to explore some of those common issues that might impede recovery in just a moment, which will be a little bit more focused on different aspects of your environment and some of the more common things that we come across. But for folks that would like more information regarding the Unitrends solution, I'd like to open up another poll here quickly. If you would like additional information regarding Unitrends technology specifically, whether that's local backup, cloud services, disaster recovery as a service, please do feel free to indicate your choice here. We do have full feature trial software available. We'll be looking at a little bit of the interface later on today, but you can sign up for a full demonstration and have one of our SEs kind of walk through your environment with you. And if you'd like to just hop on with one of our representatives and talk through some questions that you may have and learn a little bit more, feel free to indicate that and we'd be happy to contact you. So I'll leave this open for about 30 seconds here, give folks time to kind of answer. You should be able to submit multiple responses, so if there are a couple of things that you'd like for us as a follow-up, please feel free to indicate that, and I'll pass that along to sales, and we'll make sure that we get that those resources out to everyone. So we'll give it another 15 or so seconds. Thank you so much. All right, fantastic. Really appreciate that, folks, and we'll get you some additional information regarding the Unitrends solution here. But thank you so much, and we'll certainly make sure that that information is available. If I close too quickly, and I do want to keep things moving here, you can drop a request for additional information in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll be happy to relay that back to our sales representatives here. So let's kind of dive in and start exploring some of those common why recoveries fail, and a bulk of what we've observed, and I spent some time with one of our eval engineers. He's responsible for standing up and ensuring customers have success with our solution. Talk through with him what are some of the most common issues and errors that we come into that we see with our customers as we are deploying the solution and recoveries are failing. Where it starts with, in a lot of cases, is leveraging VSS writers, and they're a common tool that's going to be utilized by the backup technology. We're going to integrate with those VSS writers to quiesce and receive specific data, whether that be application-specific data or otherwise, to create the backup files that we are building. But most Windows servers may have multiple VSS writers installed, and you've got different drivers that are being used for database-driven applications that may vary from Active Directory, Microsoft SQL, or Exchange Server. So we're leveraging a number of these. Servers have a ton of them installed. This clip here was just the top of the list at Google. There were probably another 30 or so on this list. A really broad matrix of different writers that we need to be interacting with to successfully create and receive backup data. When that goes awry, there are a few kind of common issues that we see, and it starts with leveraging multiple backup applications. So thinking back to that infrastructure, sort of that Frankenstein example here, if you've got multiple DPUs that are competing for log data or VSS writer data, it can result in conflicts such as files being corrupt, empty log files, or missed backups altogether. So if you've got multiple DPUs that are competing for the same sources here, you potentially run into risks or errors. Running competing backups at the same time can produce undesirable results. If you've got a virtual machine that you are protecting at the hypervisor level, but you're also installing an agent into the guest OS, you could run into unfavorable or undesirable results when you're trying to run multiple backups against a particular system. Backups may fail if the agent's VSS writers are in a failed state, but it might not always be feasible or realistic to restart that server or the backup process during business hours. Writers that have stalled and are not running will create issues as well, uncovering where those may be underlying. And when you're searching in and pumping in through the Windows command, the VSS admin list writers, it's only going to show you the writers that are in a started state, maybe not those that were not started or failed to boot correctly, and also running into issues with out-of-date versions with VSS. So fairly common, and there's a myriad of issues here. Just closing out this this poll here. My apologies. I thought I had stopped that. Oh, excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone. Again, we've closed that. So a myriad of issues here. So when it comes to remediation of fixing these errors, there are a few options here. You can disable all but one backup application. Again, we're not going to have multiple data processing units competing for the same sources here. You can restart the VSS service from the services console. Again, we recognize that it might not always be feasible to reboot a mission-critical server or a back-end web database during business hours. You can disable and re-enable the shadow copy service, or you can attempt to search Microsoft support for available hot fixes for VSS. Or, and this is where we are trending, there's a great deal of new development in machine learning that we've been working on behind the scenes. It will be coming out and being released shortly, leveraging a backup appliance that via an agent is automatically going to identify and remediate VSS issues, whether that be restarting the service, restarting the backup process. It's something that we are building, smarter IT, looking to reduce that manual intervention. So keep an eye out on Unitrends.com, on social media here for announcements here coming very shortly. It's where we are trending, looking to get smarter and reduce some of that manual intervention, again, that tuning and managing of local backup systems. We also more commonly see issues with Active Directory, and not surprising because it's one of the most critical components of your IT infrastructure. Running AD for a Windows domain is going to authenticate and authorize all users and computers within that domain. This shouldn't be probably for folks, it's probably not new information, and it may be fairly obvious that the Active Directory server has to be restored before applications that depend on it, so that again we can come in and authorize and authenticate. But backing up via Active Directory, could be tricky. And according to Microsoft, a good backup, a quote-unquote good backup, includes at least the system state and the contents of those disks. So the components that are comprising up that system state on the domain controller will include your system startup files, your boot files, the system registry, the class registration database, or your COM, the component object model, sysvolume information, and then the Active Directory components themselves, the NTDS database, checkpoint files, transaction logs, reserved transaction logs as well. So there are a lot of components and states here, and the best practice for restoring Active Directory is going to depend on what sort of failure we have encountered here. A non-authoritative restore is the default method for restoring Active Directory. It's going to recover your domain controller to its system state at the time the backup was taken. Now, after restore, that domain controller is going to query its replication partners, and that normal replication is going to overwrite the current state with changes that have occurred after that backup was taken. You're typically going to be leveraging these non-authoritative restores in most situations that are resulting from AD data loss or corruption. But you also have the ability to perform an authoritative restore, which is going to recover the database directory to its state that it was in when the backup was made. It's going to overwrite at that time all of the other domain controllers to match the restored DC. So performing an authoritative restore is typically the measure that we will take when human error is involved. For example, if an administrator were to come in, accidentally delete a number of objects, that change has then been replicated to other domain controllers, it might not necessarily be an easy or straightforward task to recreate all of those objects. The advantage here is that you don't have to perform an authoritative restore of the entire directory. You can choose to only make certain objects authoritative. So when you're restoring only parts of the directory, Windows is going to update the rest of the restored database by using that information from the other DCs to bring the directory up to date. It will then replicate the objects marked as authoritative to the other domain controllers. So the authoritative restore is not going to overwrite new objects that have been created after the backup was taken. So a lot of times they're recommending just restore the smallest unit necessary. So for example, if you're only trying to restore a single subtree, don't recover, or you don't need to restore the entire directory. So a few different things that can happen here, from the fairly obvious, hey, we need to put AD back before we start to restore other components, to have we created a good backup? Do we have the necessary logs? And with the backups that we've created and facing the error or the outage that we have, what's the best restore process for us, a non-authoritative or an authoritative restore? A lot of things to kind of keep in mind and consider here when it comes to dependencies or the clients that are depending on Active Directory. We also see with the majority of environments having at least some element of virtualization in there, errors that can arise with production VM disk configuration. VMware can create native snapshots, but those snapshots are stored on the same drives that the virtual disk of the host is residing on to be used in recovery. There are some issues with configuration in that if you're configuring VMware both disks that are needed for backup, if they're in independent mode, they're not going to be affected by snapshot. The backups ultimately will be empty. As we had mentioned, you can run into performance issues if you're trying to back up the guest OS via the agent. It can be inefficient because that virtualization layer is sitting in between the guest OS and the physical hardware, so that guest OS does not have direct access to the physical hardware where the data resides. A backup agent inside of the guest OS has to go through that virtualization layer to get the VM data. In some cases, this method is driving up unnecessary resource usage on the host. If multiple backups are running simultaneously, you can run into really easily performance bottlenecks in which we've got incomplete backups, backups that are timing out, or worse, backups that potentially the data is corrupt or the virtual disks that are empty. It comes into, if you're leveraging change block tracking, we're leveraging CBT initially to collect those changes or delta changes that are occurring to the VMDKs after the initial full was taken. There are a number of VMware issues that may cause the CBT system to fail or successfully track change, leading to orphan snapshots. If you are seeing, or some of these systems are present, we've backed up a virtual machine and CBT has failed after upgrading to a new version. We're unable to power on the virtual machine. We're unable to expand the size of that virtual disk, or we're trying to take virtual machine snapshots and the quiesced snapshots are failing, you may be running into issues with heap exhaustion. It can occur when attempting to enable the CBT drivers. If a virtual machine with a large number of disks has reached an upper threshold, that heap exhaustion can occur. If you've got multiple virtual machines with CBT enabled or even with VSS enabled, taking a quiesced snapshot is going to create double the amount of memory overhead. So we can run into those performance issues based on configuration and some of the other components that we are relying on here for those production disks to take those regular incremental backups. We've also got sort of competing methodology here in that some folks will say, hey, well, natively I can take snapshots through my hypervisor. Why would I need to create backups here? And traditional snapshots or native snapshots, as I had mentioned, are a mechanism to record delta changes from a certain point in time. Files are put in place, or the files that are put in place to make snapshots possible reside on the same storage infrastructure as those parent disks. So when we think about what we're trying to create by taking backups, we want them to be completely autonomous from the virtual machine that we are protecting to guard against that host or that hardware level failure. The Delta disks that are created with native snapshots are not autonomous from either physical infrastructure or the virtual infrastructure of the VM. They are dependent on the parent VM disk or that chain of snapshots if there are multiple in existence. And if we run into an issue or an error where the base disks ends up deleted, snapshots in and of themselves are not enough to restore the virtual machine. It's backups that we are leveraging that are taken and stored using that CBT information are able to be recovered without any dependencies on the parent VM or the underlying files. VMware, from their best practices, and that KB article that links there as well, recommend that snapshots are not supposed to be used as backups. They are not meant to exist long term. They are kind of checkpoints. They're not meant to linger forever in the environment. VMware recommends leveraging a snapshot for no more than 72 hours. You may leverage that to rollback point in time after a patch test. That's perfectly fine, but we don't want to keep them in place as a backup per se, because that file size is growing as it's retained over time, again, potentially running into impacting storage location space, system performances, and other potential errors here. So again, when we're creating those backups, we want to have a solution that's creating those snapshots and recording those changes completely autonomously from the underlying hardware or the virtual infrastructure. It's a fairly common issue that we've come across when folks are trying to leverage simply native snapshots for backups themselves. So we've outlined a couple of the more common issues, VSS writers, Active Directory dependencies, issues and errors with snapshots here. Let's take a look at some recommendations and some solutions that are available. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but using that single data backup and recovery solution to reduce some of the DPUs that are competing for information with your production environment. You're also able to reduce some of those gaps, reduce some of the siloed components of infrastructure, reduce some of that management, whether it be through multiple interfaces, multiple different processes, support lines, vendors here, an all-in-one solution, again, to back up and recover your entire infrastructure, whether we're dealing with physical clients, virtual machines, application-specific data. We're also looking for a new approach in some cases here where in the reality of today's infrastructure, it's a multi-cloud environment. We've got N-tier now applications that have multiple servers that might be responsible in bringing up and delivering that application. Multi-cloud computing is a reality with the prominence of SaaS applications. Increasingly, folks looking to leverage public cloud to offload some of that manual burden or infrastructure, reducing that local footprint. And we've also seen a demand for really global 24-hour protection, no matter where their data resides. It's critically important to businesses at this day, in this day and age. So we're looking for that 24-hour protection. A lot of what we're trying to drive here at Unitrends is to start to go beyond the scope of manual human intervention, moving from that server level backup and recovery to enabling our customers with 100% uptime. Again, developing tools and techniques that are going to be invisible, automated, respond proactively, and enable that continuous protection. Again, just one of the things that we're looking at is that self-healing agent to resolve VSS conflicts and issues with VSS writers, one of the most common culprits of those failed backups. So keep an eye out, again, with the ability to actively monitor backup and recovery, determining the cause of failure before the backup is even run, automate remediation, correct common issues without waiting for administration approval, provided that they're within predefined parameters or rules that are set. This software and what we are developing should be enough to identify the issue and resolve it, work around it, and again, reduce that human or that manual intervention. It's what we are driving towards here at Unitrends. And again, as we're seeing RTOs and RPOs shrinking to zero, we're looking for near zero recovery, that 4 nines of availability, giving you 4 minutes of downtime per month. And what does that boil down to per day? We're talking seconds. It really is a high demand on IT. So we're looking to catch errors in advance, fix and test them, or even dispose of bad backups before they can impact recovery. One of the tools, or excuse me, one of the issues and one of the common challenges that we see as well is that folks are unable to test their backups as frequently as they know that they should, or as frequently as that they would like to. The majority are testing only once a year or not at all. And when you think about all of the changes that occur within your environment in 12 months, is a test that you ran in January and February going to be a realistic benchmark for performance, or for what the environment looks like come towards the end of the year, November, December? So much can change in that time. The importance of regular testing, we can't stress enough. Again, disasters do not call ahead. So one of the ways in which we have enabled proactive and automated measures is through our recovery testing. It's what we call data copy access, and I'm actually going to hop into our interface here and show you what this looks like. So for folks that are newer to Unitrends, what you're looking at here is our UI dashboard. It's an HTML-based dashboard, so once your appliance has its IP on your local network, you're able to access our dashboard through any Chrome or Firefox browser from the IP here. Over on the left are key tabs for functionality within the environment, protect, recover, scheduling out our jobs, reporting functionality, and appliance and asset configuration. Our system-wide alerts are available here in the top right. These are viewable right from our UI dashboard. It's one of the first places you'll want to check. You can also configure email notifications, capture trap notifications here, so a lot of ways to collect this information. We also have our help menu here again, support with Unitrends, entirely US-based. You can access online chat help 24/7, our community and library of knowledge-based articles, as well as being able to open up a support tunnel directly from your appliance to our support center in Columbia, South Carolina. Have one of our technicians remote in and work with you to review log messages and review any errors and take steps to remediate those errors once they've occurred. Elsewhere on the dashboard here, you can configure and customize that view from this gear icon in the top of any of these tiles to put the most important information front and center for you. For example, here we're looking at a summary of the assets that we are protected, so these have a backup in the last 7 days. Assets that have registered to our system that do not have a backup, any errors that have occurred, our speed, summaries of recovery, replication that we're performing to our backup copy targets, recovery assurance, though right here, this tile, I like to leave it front and center on my dashboard, the outcome of some of that automation in advance here. With recovery assurance, you are designing and setting up those application level recovery tests to proactively simulate that failover process and identify any issues within the backups that there might be. You will see, errors that have occurred during backups here. If they do occur, you can see that from your protection summaries here. But I wanted to show you what this testing looks like, because it's so straightforward and so automated for our users. It's one of their favorite features, and for For a lot of customers that have come over from other platforms, they've told us that it was data copy access that really convinced or really delighted them and got them excited about leveraging Unitrends. So data copy access is the function of one of our backup jobs. From the Create Job tab here, you would come in and create data copy access. And now once we create this job, we're going to be pulling and testing backups that we've already created. You can test your replicas, test your snapshots here. So you can spin up this isolated sandbox test, but it's going to take you a layer beyond screenshot verification here. So let's kind of take a look at configuration. So in this case, we want to test some of our VMware snapshots. So from our backup catalog, we've got all of the machines that have a backup that's been created. For this particular test, we have 3 machines in concert here: our SQL Server, Active Directory, and our web server. So 3 machines that are going to be included in this test here. You'll come over and set up a lab profile. So not only can you use data copy access for testing, but you can spin up an isolated lab environment for patch testing, DevOps, QA testing, as well as performing push-button failover. So when we set up our test, we can give it a custom name up at the top here, and because we're testing VMware, our target is going to be to one of our VMware hosts. So we'll select our host that we're going to be leveraging for testing, resource pools where configured, the data store here. Now recovery will be live to our VM network. If we do need to perform failover, we're going to recover live to the VM network, but we've also created an isolated network here, our sandbox network, that you'll configure prior to standing up and starting the data copy access job, to keep all of our testing isolated here within this network, and we'll be testing off of our local ETH0 appliance. You will also put in recovery point and recovery time objectives to track compliance here as well. So we will benchmark compliance, but it's going to take you a layer deeper here. So we've created our lab profile. You can leverage that at any time. You can select it from the drop down here. We have a few that we've already created. Here's our DCA, our 4-hour RPO. So we've created our lab profile. This contains all of our details for the test that we'll be running. We review our summary information, and we're going to create a schedule. You can run this job on demand or create a schedule. Simply toggle on the days of the week you want the job to run, determine its start time and its recurrence in intervals of hours or minutes where more frequency is required. Lastly, here's where we're going beyond that screenshot verification. I have a colleague that affectionately refers to screenshot verification as Schrodinger's backup. You've created a backup file, but you haven't logged in to the machine. We have no intel or information on that underlying data. Will restore work? Is the data corrupted? Is the data infected? We don't know until we attempt to recover. We've worked with customers that have recovered from those screenshot verified backups only to find that the data was corrupted, or the backup file was empty. It was created, but hey, you know, we were pulling from log errors, and there were errors there. We had an empty backup file. Worst case, the backup was infected with ransomware. Ransomware is not going to disable the boot volume and the operating system. It wants you to be able to log in to access that machine and pay them their ransom. So we're taking you beyond that by orchestrating these application level scripts. We're going to configure and set up this testing. So as we're spinning up and performing this test, you can define things like the boot order of these machines, reconfigure the CPU and the memory, re-IP the machines, adjust credentials here. We're going to leave Active Directory in our first boot group. As we had mentioned earlier, we're going to want to bring and restore AD up first. And in our tests, we can execute a couple of different scripts here. You can run your own custom scripting, scan drives and folders for malware with our CLAM AV tool, or leverage one of the 50+ application level tests that we have scripted and built into the platform here. In this case, we're going to test that domain service, execute this test against the NTDS database. So we're going to add that into our test here and save here. Secondly, we're going to bring up our SQL machine. We're going to put this in our boot group of 2. We're going to come in and configure a couple of tests here for the SQL machine as well. Firstly, we could run a query with an expected output or check the status of a particular instance. In this case, our WebDB, this SQL instance, backends into our web server. So we're going to test our WebDB service, and we're also going to execute the Windows service and make sure that our database service, or our database engine, SQL Server is running here. So we're testing the instance itself. The database engine will save out our test for SQL. And lastly, we're going to spin up our web server. We're going to add this and bring this up in our third boot group. And we're going to add in a couple of tests for web as well here. Firstly, we're going to test IIS, make sure that we can publish and post to the website. And then we are also going to run a quick ping test and make sure that it can communicate with its back-end database, that Burlab SQL machine that we'll be spinning up second here. So we've added in this testing here, and do you see how different this is than that screenshot verification going in and authenticating the underlying data, confirming that the backups that we have created are going to be functional and are responding in a way that we anticipate so that we can thoroughly map through recovery. Once that job has been saved, you can access it from your jobs manager here, and again, you can run this testing on demand, spin up that isolated lab environment for patch testing, QA, DevOps, or even push button failover, essentially one-click failover to that host as specified. So you can set all of this up in advance proactively to be ready to respond to a downtime incident. The results of the recovery assurance testing we did see on our dashboard, but you can drill down deeper into our reporting functionality here, and all of this is baked in and included. There's no additional proxy that needs to be stood up, no database licensing that you need to perform. It comes ready out of the box, so to speak here. So the first report that's generated is a compliance report, easily exportable into a PDF or a CSV file. We can see the results of that spin up here. So for example, against a profile RTO of 30 minutes and RPO of 24 hours, our recovery time actuals were between 5 and 9 minutes, so we were compliant in bringing these machines up in the windows specified, and the last backups were created about 8 to 10 hours ago, so we're tolerant here as well with that 24-hour threshold for data loss. And again, these settings are all customizable. They're going to be based off of the schedules that you create, so if you're creating a policy-based backup and that RPO that you're striving to meet is in minutes or hours, you can run that recovery assurance testing against that profile RPO to regularly benchmark and making sure that we're able to meet those recovery times and that our backup windows are occurring with the frequency that is desired. Again, these are easily exportable into a PDF or a CSV, so you can put these in the hands of a compliance officer, business owner, whoever it might be that would benefit from that information. You can also view the results of the application tests from the recovery assurance testing here. Again, easily exportable into a PDF or a CSV. And I went a few days back so that I could show you what a failed and a successful test look like here. When we've got a successful test, it's going to break down all of the steps in the recovery operation. So we're querying and pulling our job properties. We're starting our instant recovery process. And here are our three machines, Web, SQL, and AD. We've reconfigured the VMs as specified, and we're going to power them on. First in our boot group is Active Directory. NTDS, the domain service, is on and responding. Similarly for SQL, that machine comes up second. And in this case, the service database engine is running, the instance is intact. And lastly, that web server, IIS, is running. That Windows service test was successful. We're going to be able to post the website, and it can communicate with its back-end database, successfully responding here. So we've got these backups here now that are clean, are tested. We've verified the integrity of the underlying application data. The service is here. Our instances are intact. Again, you could be running queries here with expected output, whatever information you need to provide yourself or enable you with that proof and confidence in your recovery points to come. Once we've executed these scripts, we power off the VMs, tear them down, halt that instant recovery process, and update both our compliance and the recovery assurance reports that you can export here right from your local UI. Now, a failed test here, the goal is going to identify where in the process we came into an error, and it will attempt to identify what that error is here. An error has occurred while sending the request. We've got some timing out of these operations here. This could prove detrimental, because if we've got these instant recovery sessions that we've been unable to tear down, you cannot run concurrent IR sessions for the same machine. So when we come in to run another test, or if we were targeting this host for failover or that isolated lab, we wouldn't be able to spin up these VMs. But again, throughout this process here, here as we were running and executing these different scripts. If there are errors with services or queries producing unexpected outputs, those would be notified and signaled to you here as well. So again, we're proactively attempting to identify issues or errors there might be, restore, and then from your from your Recover tab, if you're looking to make a recovery from a backup, you'll be able to identify those clean, tested backups. They'll be marked in green here, having passed successful recovery assurance tests. So when we see our SQL machine as well, these backups have all been tested. For example, here, these backups in this black test here have not been tested by recovery assurance. So we can readily see backups that are clean and have passed the defined recovery assurance tests. Should we need to grab these for file level recovery, instant recovery of the full machine, if we wanted to carve out replicas here proactively, a lot of great information here that is relayed through that recovery assurance testing. And you also see that right from your dashboard tile here. We like to keep it front and center. Where we're meeting compliance, we can see that we are meeting the application tests, but we did have some failures that we would want to investigate here as well. So some great information that's viewable, again being powered by data copy access. We kind of looked at this in the interface, so I'm going to just push through these quickly here, these slides here. So that brings us to kind of the conclusion. So I really want to thank everyone for joining us here today. Again, thank you so much. Hopefully you've taken some insight and some things to consider if you've encountered failed recoveries within your environment. We do have some additional info here, so I'm just going to put this into the chat. I'm going to pull down my screen for just a moment and open things up for the Q&A. But there are some helpful tips here and some different tricks. Our recovery checklist is a nice little white paper that our marketing folks put together. You can check this out, and it goes through some of the other more common issues that that we have seen or that we've encountered here. So I'm going to post that into the chat, as well as our demo link. So if, again, you'd like to request a live demo, you can grab this link here. And I will open things up to Q&A here in just a moment, so please feel free to submit any questions that may have occurred, and I'll take a look at what we've got submitted here as well in just a moment. I'm just going to put a couple of links here into the chat. And excellent. So, Dan, thank you so much. I'm glad you like the GUI and the interface there. We've strived to really make it streamlined and easy to use. We do have a question here from John, and John is wondering how big are the backup appliances and how are they licensed? So John, that's a great question. The backup appliances, the Recovery series, those purpose-built appliances scale from 2 to 120 terabytes, and we have 15 models in between. We released this 8th generation late last year, so they've been in the marketplace for about a year now, and one of our big goals was closing some of those sizing gaps towards the upper line of those models. So they scale from 2 to 120 terabytes. And the licensing is a no-limits license. They are capacity-based, so we're looking at that raw capacity and a suggested capacity for backup, but you've got access to unlimited agents, unlimited hosts or socket count. Whatever you can fit on the appliance, you're eligible to back up. We're typically sizing these boxes for about 30 to 45 days of retention. Can certainly get into larger sizing practices. Look at leveraging our GFS-enabled retention to get greater storage utilization out of those appliances. Let's take a look here. We have a question from Susan, and Susan's wondering where are the Unitrends cloud data centers? So Susan, we operate multiple geo-redundant data centers across the United States, Canada, Germany, the UK, and Australia. These data centers are SSAE 18 certified, SOC compliant data centers. That SOC report is available to customers upon request, but they meet the compliancy standards for a number of major industry compliances, the SOC 2 Type 2 audit, CGIS controls and audits by leveraging our AES 256-bit encryption and certain retention periods. We've helped organizations maintain HIPAA compliance for the long-term retention of their backups, and we're also adhering strictly to data sovereignty laws. So there is redundancy put in place to guard against data center level outages, but we are never replicating data outside of the country of origin. It's really critical for a lot of our U.S. and our Canadian-based customers to not have data crossing country lines, and we adhere strictly to those laws. You can view additional information in the Unitrends Cloud FAQ on unitrends.com. We also have a question here from Suhail, and I apologize if I mispronounce that, but Suhail is wondering what applications can you protect with your agent? So Suhail, we have application agents specifically for SQL, Exchange, SharePoint, and Oracle. A great place to look is if you search your common browser for compatibility, Unitrends compatibility, you'll be brought, we've got this online compatibility matrix here, which is what you're looking at on your screen. So you can see all of the operating system versions and applications that are supported, the features that are going to be supported here. We're going all the way back to Windows 2003. Which is important, I think, for some folks that haven't been able to upgrade or migrate up. You know, we're not always on that regular 3-year refresh cycle as much as we would like to be. We've got a lot of support for some aging or some legacy operating systems here. I mean, heck, we just discontinued our support for Windows NT in the last like 6 months. It would surprise you how many folks, you know, we still see leveraging that platform. But relative to Exchange, it's going to detail, you know, application-specific backup for all of the supported versions here for Exchange, for SQL, for Active Directory here. But we've also got some other, you know, database and applications here, MySQL, Progress here, Postgres. File backup, in these cases, we will be able to perform, but application backups, we won't have application agents specifically for some of those platforms. So if you've got questions around compatibility, you can always check out that compatibility matrix online here, kind of a great place or a great resource to kind of check out some of that information here. So we have got a question from Larry, and Larry is wondering, would your solution be able to perform a migration, say from moving an IBM I from one location into a different data center? Larry, we would be able in some cases to perform replication, and then you'd be able to rebuild those machines or those instances from the backups. Some of the migration that we can also perform is into or out of public cloud infrastructure. But I think that with our replication, all of the data is going to be WAN optimized. That is to say that it is going to be compressed, encrypted, and deduplicated globally. So we do replicate efficiency. I would have to look a little bit deeper into the IBM I piece, but there's a safe bet that we'd be able to replicate that data to another location, and you'd be able to rebuild, in some cases on dissimilar hardware, rebuild that platform or recover to a different platform. I think regarding that specific use case, I'd have to do a little bit more research just to understand some of the nuances and the requirements there, but I'd be happy to kind of take that offline additionally and look a little bit more into that for you. Thank you for the question. Excellent. So I'm going to save that and follow up offline. Those were the questions that we did have submitted here. So I'll hang out for the next minute or so if folks have any other things that they're thinking of kind of last minute here. But otherwise, again, I really want to thank you for joining the last webinar in our series, kind of demystifying those issues that can impede recoveries. So Adam Margette, again here from Unitrends, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great rest of your day. Great rest of your week ahead. It was my pleasure being your host today. Hopefully you enjoyed and got some information out of the session here. So thank you all again, and take care.